For many, the Bergin Crew of Ozone Park will always be synonymous with the swaggering John Gotti. But after the Dapper Don ascended to the top spot in the Gambino crime family, who were the mobsters over the years that succeeded Gotti as captain of the Queens-based crew? Let's check it out. Welcome to OC Shorts, bringing you detailed historical snapshots of the American Mafia and other organised crime. Feel free to subscribe if you like that sort of thing. Today we're going to take a quick look at the list of mobsters that succeeded John Gotti as captain of what was known as the Bergin Crew in Ozone Park. The roots of the Bergin Crew go back to the days of Gotti's predecessor as captain of the crew, Carmine Charlie Wagons Fatico, the man who was an early mentor to the future Teflon Don. Fatico had been a made man and soldier in the crew of Captain Armand Tommy Raver, in the family that was then headed by Albert Anastasia. Tommy Raver's crew boasted a group of soldiers who individually would go on to have great success in the Gambino crime family. It consisted of Neil Dellacroce, James Jimmy Brown Filer, Anthony Rizzo, Mike Caiazza, Fat Andy Ruggiano, Todo Arello, and of course Charlie Wagons Fatico himself. After Tommy Raver was murdered in the late 1950s, his crew was split between Neil Dellacroce and Anthony Rizzo, who became captains. Whereas Todo Arello and Jimmy Brown Filer went into the crew of old school mobster Anthony Rizzo, Carmine Charlie Wagons Fatico went with Neil Dellacroce. Neil Dellacroce was elevated to underboss for Carlo Gambino in 1965, and Mike Caiazza would take over as captain of his old crew. And possibly around this time, Carmine Charlie Wagons Fatico was awarded his own crew when he was promoted to the position of captain. Fatico initially operated out of East New York, but would move the base of his operations to Ozone Park and set up a social club known as the Bergin Hunt and Fish Club. Carmine Fatico had a crew of made men under him, including his younger brother Danny Wagons Fatico and Anthony Fat Andy Ruggiano. But Charlie Wagons also had a group of young and hungry associates around him, including John Carniglia, John Gotti, Angelo Ruggiero, and a certain John Gotti. In the early 1970s, Carmine Fatico was having some legal problems, and so initially he had his brother Danny Wagons Fatico installed as acting captain. At this time, John Gotti was in prison on a hijacking conviction, and then was released in 1972. Danny Wagons, like his brother, was also having legal problems. And despite having other made men in the crew, Mafia law tells us that the unmade associate, John Gotti, was at this time promoted to a sort of unofficial captain of the Fatico crew. In 1973, John Gotti was involved in the murder of James McBratney, and despite what other documentaries tell you, this was nothing to do with revenge for the kidnapping of Carlo Gambino's nephew, Manny Gambino. I cover this in one of my previous videos. Anyway, after the McBratney killing, John Gotti goes on the lam. And logic would dictate that perhaps at this point, Danny Fatico became acting captain again. John Gotti was arrested in 1974 after his whereabouts was tipped off to the authorities by Willie Boy Johnson. And despite his future hard stance on plea deals, John Gotti would accept a 4-year plea deal for his involvement in the McBratney killing, of which he would only serve 2 years. Gotti was released from prison in the summer of 1977, and in late October that year, it is believed that he was officially inducted into the Gambino crime family, which was now headed by Paul Castellano. Shortly after his induction, most sources state that Gotti was then officially made acting captain of Fatico's crew. Charlie Wagons and his brother Danny were in the midst of a legal battle in the late 1970s. A legal document from 1978 states, Carmine and Daniel Fatico were indicted in connection with a series of truck hijackings. After a mistrial was declared due to a jury deadlock, they pleaded guilty to and were convicted of 1 count of conspiracy to possess a quantity of furs stolen from a foreign shipment. They faced maximum sentences of 5 years imprisonment and $10,000 fines. Prior to sentencing, defendants objected to statements in the pre-sentence reports identifying them as made members of the Gambino organised crime family and important figures in the upper echelons of organised crime activity. Fatico would avoid jail time but was sentenced to 5 years probation, and he was banned from interacting with any other criminals apart from his brother Daniel. One newspaper in 1981 said of Fatico, "Last year, Fatico was observed by probation officers entering an Ozone Park social club that he had been barred from visiting. He received an official reprimand and was warned that he would be sent to jail if he violated the ban again. The only criminal he is allowed to see is his brother, reputed Gambino soldier Daniel Fatico." Today, Carmine Fatico is a virtual prisoner within his own home, according to law enforcement sources. Some sources like to state that it was in the early 1980s that John Gotti became official captain of Fatico's crew. However, there is a strong argument that suggests that Gotti remained an acting captain right up until the point that he became boss. And the details of Gotti's rise to the top of the Gambino crime family by way of the assassination of Paul Castellano are well documented. With Gotti now heading the family, in 1986 he promoted his old friend Angelo Ruggiero to be the captain of the Bergin Crew in Ozone Park. Interestingly, according to some sources, Angelo Ruggiero had grander aspirations and saw himself as a possible candidate for the position of underboss after Frankie DeCicco was murdered. However, this was fanciful thinking from Ruggiero, who had started to become an embarrassment for John Gotti. He was a compulsive talker who was repeatedly caught on FBI wiretaps. According to mob turncoat Sammy the Bull Gravano, Gotti even wanted to kill his old friend Ruggiero because of his fucking big mouth on them fucking tapes. In 1988, Ruggiero was demoted and ostracised by Gotti, and would die of cancer the following year. Ruggiero's replacement as captain of the Bergin Crew was John Gotti, brother of the Dapper Don. Interestingly, due to John Gotti being in prison in the mid-1970s, his younger brother Gene was actually inducted into the Gambino crime family before him, Gene taking the oath in 1976. John Gotti's reign as captain was short-lived, when he, along with John Carniglia, was sentenced to 50 years in prison in 1989. Both men eventually serving just shy of 30 years inside. Gene was replaced as captain of the Bergin Crew in 1989 by another Gotti brother, Peter. Unsurprisingly, the identities of the made men who were in the crew that Peter Gotti inherited had changed a great deal in the last 10 years, since the time that Carmine Fatico was the official captain and John Gotti was acting captain. It is alleged that the made men in the Fatico Gotti crew in 1979 consisted of Danny Wagons Fatico, Carmine's brother, Anthony Fat Andy Ruggiano, Angelo Ruggiero, John Gotti, Nick Corozzo, John Carniglia, Lenny DiMaria, and Anthony Tony Lee Guerrieri. In the early 1980s, it's alleged that Ruggiano, Corozzo and DiMaria were transferred to Mike Caiazza's crew, which used to be Neil Dellacroce's. And by 1989, things had definitely changed. In Peter Gotti's Bergin Crew, he now had the likes of Dominic Skinny Dom Pizzonia, Salvatore Uncle Sal Scala, and Ronnie One-Arm Trucchio. In 1999, it is said that Peter Gotti was made acting boss of the Gambino crime family. And at this point, the historic crew that dated back to the 1960s under Carmine Fatico was split up. Sources indicate that after Peter Gotti's ascension to acting boss, the crew was divided between Dominic Skinny Dom Pizzonia and Salvatore Uncle Sal Scala. Both of these men had allegedly been involved in the murders of Paul Castellano and Tommy Bilotti, Pizzonia being a backup shooter, and Scala with his brother-in-law Eddie Lino, the shooters of Tommy Bilotti. Some suggest that this divide signalled the end of the former Fatico Gotti Bergin Crew in the traditional sense, but we can follow the lineage for a couple more decades, mainly through Dominic Pizzonia's crew, who allegedly inherited the most members of Peter Gotti's former crew. Skinny Dom Pizzonia was a capable mobster who, as I mentioned, had allegedly been a backup shooter in the Paul Castellano hit. I've covered his career in further detail in a previous video that can be seen here. Dominic Pizzonia would have legal problems relating to his alleged involvement in several murders, including that of Thomas and Rosemary Hoover, the modern day Bonnie and Clyde who had been robbing mob social clubs in 1992. The Hoovers' luck would run out, and allegedly Dominic Pizzonia and Ronnie "One-Arm" Trucchio would track them down and shoot them to death in their car on Christmas Eve 1992. Whilst Dominic Pizzonia was dealing with legal problems in the early noughties, for which he would eventually be sent away for 15 years, crew member Ronnie "One-Arm" Trucchio took over as captain of the crew. Ronald Trucchio obtained his nickname after he had lost the use of one of his arms in a childhood accident. He was a greatly feared and respected individual. He, however, like his predecessors, would be plagued by legal problems. And in Tampa, in March 2007, Ronnie "One-Arm" Trucchio was sentenced to life in prison for racketeering and drug charges. Interestingly, Trucchio received a life sentence despite no murder conviction. Ronald Trucchio was succeeded as captain of the crew by his son Alphonse. Al Trucchio was considered a mob prodigy. He was a big earner, a rising star, and definitely considered by people on both sides of the law as a mobster to watch. But like his father, Al Trucchio experienced legal issues, and he was caught up in the so-called Mafia takedown in 2011. Al Trucchio pled guilty to a host of charges including racketeering, gambling and loan sharking, and sentenced to 121 months. At the time of this video, Alphonse Trucchio is out on parole, and his current status in the criminal world is up for debate. Succeeding Alphonse Trucchio as captain of the crew was veteran mobster Thomas "Monk" Sassano. Sassano had been in the crew of Salvatore Uncle Sal Scala after the Bergin Crew had been split. And allegedly, Monk Sassano was Sal Scala's right-hand man. And the pair were both found guilty in 2007 of extorting millions of dollars from the VIP club in Manhattan over a 10-year period. It is alleged that during Sal Scala's incarceration, the remainder of his crew was absorbed into the Trucchio crew. Anyway, after Alphonse Trucchio was imprisoned and later demoted, Thomas "Monk" Sassano was elevated to the position of captain in around 2014 or 2015. It is alleged that he is the current captain to this day. Interestingly, there are also those that state that after Gambino mobster Michael "Mickey Boy" Paradiso had come out of prison after a lengthy stretch, he was made a captain in 2002 of a crew that had some remnants and roots of the famous Ozone Park Bergin Crew. Paradiso himself had historic links to the crew. Mickey Boy had started his criminal career under Gambino captain Olympia Garofalo, but in 1986, when he had finished an 8-year hijacking sentence, he was allegedly transferred to the crew of newly appointed Bergin Crew captain Angelo Ruggiero. Around a year later, Mickey Boy Paradiso was convicted on a narcotics charge and received a long sentence, being released finally in the year 2000, after an initial release in 1998, but had been sent back on parole violations. Until recently, it was said that Michael Paradiso had been the consigliere of the Gambino crime family. I hope you found that quick history of the Bergin Crew interesting. Thanks for watching.